What's going on, guys? In this video, I am going to be doing Q&A from the vinyl community, specifically for this one, the Too Many Records Facebook group. So if you're not familiar, I have a group on Facebook. There's over 3,000 people. We talk about vinyl all day, every day. It's awesome. If you'd like to join, link is in the description. But what I did for this first one was I asked, what questions do you have about music, about this channel, really anything vinyl related, and I'm going to pick the ones that I think are the best to answer and answer them in a segment that hopefully will be a recurring one that you guys enjoy. So for future segments, I will be taking questions not just from the comment section below, but if you ever have a question and say it's for a future Q&A video, leave a question on any video I put out and I'll take the best ones and you might see your question pop up on a future video. But right now, I got 10 really good questions to answer, so let's dive in and hear what my answers are to some of your questions. If you haven't already, it'd be awesome if you'd like this video, hit the red subscribe button, and turn your bell notifications on so you don't miss out on any weekly videos I put out. Ben asks, does the rarity of an album impact your willingness to play it? This may be a controversial opinion, I hope not, but the answer is no. Now, worth saying is that I have so many records that I am constantly going through my to-play pile and my backlog, and I'm not frequently spinning over and over and over again certain records unless I'm like really into that album in that moment, in that week. Records do degrade over time. It takes a long time when you have a good setup or a decent setup for it really to degrade to the point where you'll start to hear things. Tapes degrade a lot faster than vinyl. If I had a record worth $500 and I was playing it once a week, I'd be a little stressed about that because after your first 6 months, that is going to sound probably significantly worse than your first play, which is not something you want to do for a record that is relatively irreplaceable. But records are meant to be played. I have respect for people that want to collect a record and keep it in the shrink wrap and pristine as a collectible. That's fine, and I collect things, so I can't judge you for that. But in my opinion, records are meant to be played, even the rare ones, and it's a really satisfying feeling to get a record that maybe you can't get outside of getting lucky or paying a lot of money for it, putting it on the turntable and listening to it, knowing that you're one of the privileged people that get an opportunity to hear this beautiful recording. That's special to me. Now, if a record doesn't sound great and it's rare for just some random manufactured reason, that probably won't get played too much. Nathan asks, if you could have an audiophile label, MoFi, Analog Productions, etc., press any record they never have, what would it be? I think you guys know the answer to this. I mean, I'm going to expand on this a little further because it's so trite to talk about Alligator in every video where I talk about the albums I love. But I will say The National, for being my favorite band, has average or less than average pressings pretty much across the board for all of their releases. They sound fine on vinyl, but nothing really has that punch that really lets the instruments be properly separated and have that energy that a really good like analog or incredibly well mastered for vinyl digital recording has. They feel a little flat compared to how great the music is behind it. So for me, Alligator would be the ultimate choice. It is such a rich and nuanced album, and I think hearing it through the lens of one of those labels that really cares about the sound quality could be really interesting. Let's get one of these Bernie Grundman or Kevin Grays to cut it. Maybe even a Chris Bellman. Since that's such an obvious answer though, I'm also going to go with Carrie and Lowell by Sufjan Stevens. That is a beautiful soft album that I think requires an absolutely silent pressing with really pronounced vocals and guitar work. And the pressing Asthmatic Kitty did, unfortunately, is a little less than desirable. It has a lot of ticks, little pops. It's distracting for how beautiful the music is. And furthermore, there aren't a lot of grunge records that have really high quality analog recordings. Outside of the super unknown 320 that I've been dying to find, I think a Temple of the Dog self-titled album done by MoFi or Analog Productions would just be mind-blowing. Carl asks, are singles worth it? I've started clearing mine out because the effort is too much for me. Plus, the standard price for 2 songs is too much. Oftentimes, no. I think that 12-inch singles and 7-inch singles, if you're not a DJ, are kind of a novelty. To me, especially 7 inches, they feel a lot like trading cards, like I've made references to in the past. It's cool to have, it's cool to, collect, but I don't find myself playing 7 inches very often, unless there's something special on it. A 7-inch that has a track that you can't get anywhere else, or an alternate version, or a demo, or a live recording, that's kind of cool, and if it's a band you like or a song you like, that's probably worth getting. But just a 7-inch of a song that already exists on the album, unless it's like a really special thing where it's like a really cool colored record and super limited, or like a wax mage, or something of that ilk, I feel like it's just a little bit of a waste of money. I have 7 inches, they're all right here in this box, and I do love the 7 inches I own, but most of them are either because they're my favorite bands, favorite songs, or just a really cool concept, like that 7-inch record I showed in a video years ago that has honeycomb on the back of it. Very cool thing, really interesting novelty, but again, you don't see me spinning that on the turntable very frequently. Brandon asks, variant collecting, yes or no, and why or why not? I've talked about this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. Variant collecting is something that a lot of fans of bands do, where a record comes out that they love, and let's say there's 6 different colorways. So there's one that's, a splatter that's 300 copies, and a haze that's 200 copies, and blah blah blah. I feel like the variant game gets a little crazy if you're a pop punk band especially, or a punk band, or a band, say, I don't know, called Black Pumas. I variant collect only for my top artists and my top albums. If there are albums, like back here I have, some of my Avalanche's records, I have a few. I have a few variants of all the national records that have variants. I got 2 copies of Phoebe Bridgers' Punisher this year because that album is just perfect. So, I don't know. I think it kind of hits you in the right mood. If you like 2 different variants and you like the colorways on both and you can't decide, you can get both, because you can eventually trade one if you decide you don't want it or something like that. It's never just going to be sitting there without a market of someone who may want it. But those records that have 7 to 10 variants, that gets a little excessive for me, and unless you're a super fan and it's your favorite album, I think variant collecting can get needlessly expensive when you could be spending that money on more records or better gear. Graham asks, serious question though, for you specifically, when there are multiple variants out, do you prioritize on pressing number or how the variant looks? That's also a great question. There is a hierarchy in my brain. So the way it works is this. Number 1 is the best sounding version. If there is a version that sounds better for one reason or another, that is the one I want to get. Above all, despite the fact that I am a collector, the sound is the most important thing. I want a record that sounds great on vinyl and my setup can really show me something different than popping it onto Spotify. That is the ultimate goal of collecting vinyl for me, is to find the best or most interesting sounding versions of an album. That being said, I am a collector, so the second thing for me flip-flops between these 2. It's really hard, it kind of depends on what the variants are, but the coolest looking variant tends to be what I go for. Even if it's not the most limited, if there's something that's objectively just beautiful, that's what I'll probably get. However, if all the variants are kind of similar and I like them all, I'll go with the most limited one, because that's usually the best value, especially if you decide to trade it down the road. It's just how you make those decisions when you're on a page and you see all the different variants available and you're like, oh man, which one do I get? You got to kind of figure out, rather than, like I said in the last question, variant collect. Just pick the one that's going to be the most special to you. Brian asks, what has been the most difficult part of starting Too Many Records as a label? What have you learned throughout the process? If you were going to do it all over again, would you? And if so, what would you change? It has been an overall amazing experience starting this label. I couldn't imagine it having gone better than it has for the past year and a half. Getting to take the music of my friends and people I admire, oftentimes both overlapping, and helping it go on vinyl for the first time so everyone can get a chance to listen to it on their turntable has been infinitely rewarding for me. I don't know if I'd change anything, really. I mean, like I said, it couldn't have gone better. The first 7 releases that I did through crates were all totally sold out, and the 8th one I'm doing right now is very close to sell out. I mean, you can't really ask for a better response than that. The fans of TMR have been so supportive and so excited about my releases that it makes it an absolute joy to do all the legwork and try to figure out the right variants and the right pressing quantities and the art. Everything about it has just been a blast. And working on this most recent one with Gotta Groove and Heath at Waxmage have been super fun, eye-opening, and a great crash course on how to make records from the ground up. I hope that what I'm doing right now with Gotta Groove and Waxmage will be templatized and be the kind of way I do things moving forward. So far, the Fort Vine release has been going very well, so I think that's the case. I have a great release lined up for after Fort Vine, probably early next year. I think the hard part moving forward, if I had to pick one, will be getting artists that I had no connection to agree to be on the label. I have to hope that they see the other records and the response from you guys about the records, and maybe that'll make them trust me, but you never know. I'm still a new label, and even though we've had a lot of success, there's definitely still a long road to go. Scott asks, do you still enjoy collecting records as much as you did like 2 or 3 years ago? This question, I saw it and I paused. I really was just like, that's a really interesting question that I've never sat down and thought about the answer to. And I hate to do a cop-out, but the answer is both yes and no. The answer is yes, because obviously I love vinyl. I love listening to vinyl. I love buying records. I love going to record shops. I love every aspect of, from the moment you grab a record in the store to when you're listening to it. I love the colors of them. I love the art. I love the community. So yes, I will always love vinyl. It is one of my truest passions on this earth, and I'm so lucky I get to share this with you guys every week and turn you on to things that I like and, talk about various aspects of this industry. The negative side of it is, looking back 2 or 3 years ago, I might have been happier collecting records for a few reasons. The first being space. I am in a tiny New York City apartment right now. That might be changing at some point, but I am at full capacity. I am literally, to film this video, shuffling records around the floor so I can actually get around. It is ridiculous. And I don't have the urge to collect frequently or take a chance on things I don't know as much as I did maybe 3 or 4 years ago, because there's no space to put it. I'm out of space for shelves and I'm out of shelves. So that's a little frustrating. Secondly, as I talked about in a recent video, retail records are going up substantially in price. It is becoming way more expensive to collect records than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So by nature, that is more frustrating. And finally, I do a lot of obligation listening for the channel. I always have to get through a backlog, or I have to get through some records I want to talk about in the next video. I'm not always able to just pop over and listen to one of my favorite records in the stacks. And what I like about having a big collection, and I've talked about this before, is I have a lifetime to listen to these records. I'll be able to pull them out whenever I want. But it is a little sad that one morning when I'm like, I want to listen to a record, it's more, what do I need to listen to for the next video? Or what do I need to listen to that was sent to me? Versus, oh, what do I want to hear in the stack? So I don't think I love it as much as I did 2 or 3 years ago, but the caveat to that is I do think I will be loving it much more when any of this changes, whether the prices regulate or I find myself in a bigger, more comfortable space. Aaron asked, how does someone exhibit so much passion for instrument-based music, think Pearl Jam, yet have the same amount of passion for computer-based stuff, think Vapor, whatever it's called? The two are so different, yet you talk about them like they're brothers. It's a good question. I would never compare something like Vaporwave and Pearl Jam musically. I think the reason that I love those genres so much is because they represent such different places of the musical spectrum. I mean, if we're talking about early Pearl Jam, that is the 90s grunge scene in a nutshell. It is an encapsulation of the best music to come from that time, from that genre. And Vaporwave is a much more modern thing, you know, from the mid-2010s. It's a genre that represents the internet culture and the music that they bring. I think that they are both snapshots of a very specific time in music history, and while I don't think that they're the same, and I think that there's not a ton of overlap between fans, I tend to have a fairly eclectic taste in music, and I think that having a taste in Vaporwave helps me branch out to some of the other things like downtempo electronic, ambient, modern classical, lo-fi hip-hop. That stuff is over here. And then Pearl Jam over here is more of the rock and folk kind of stuff. Alt-rock, indie folk, whatever that may be. That's just a representation of that part of my music taste. So they're not brothers per se, but I talk about them with the same level of love because I love music in general, and there's so many genres that are worth time, especially talking about on this channel. So I try to cover the Pearl Jams as much as I cover the Vaporwave records. Ricky asks, is getting test pressings really worth it, whether you're collecting or holding onto them as a semi-investment? That's an interesting question, and I think that test pressings are a very specific thing for a very specific subset of collectors. Now, if you don't know what a test pressing is, it's basically one of the first records that comes off that gives you an example of what the record will sound like in terms of how it came out with the mastering, how the pressing process did, and obviously, when you change it to a colored record or something like that, the properties are going to change, so the sound might change slightly. There might be some imperfections that weren't there in the test pressing. So theoretically, the test pressing is the most pure version of the record that you're making because it's the first one off the press and it's the least tampered with in terms of other additives. Now, test pressings, in my experience from the past, have been between 5 and 10 copies per release. I've noticed this trend recently of labels doing 50, 100 test pressings, which to me is just a variant at that point. It's not even a test pressing anymore. And they're selling them for crazy prices, and oftentimes they're just in a white sleeve, sometimes stamped, black vinyl, white label, very basic, but they're charging a premium because it's a test pressing. Those, to me, are a complete waste of time. If it's one of your favorite albums, I'd say go for a test pressing without a doubt, but if it's just an album you like, there's really no reason to get the test pressing unless there's something special with it. I'm talking a screen printed cover or a unique cover art, something that makes it feel special outside of just being a black disc with white label and a white jacket. That to me is not that great unless there's actually 5 or 10 of them, and then it becomes a cool collectible. Jared asks, what are your thoughts on how Taylor Swift offered 8 different variants of folklore for only a week to purchase? Is it just a cash grab or a brilliant way to make money because she can't be touring? Honestly, I think it's brilliant marketing, and it is the answer, more or less, to the problem that I had in my last video where I talked about what's going on with record pricing. Taylor offered 8 variants of folklore, and they all had different colors and they all had different covers, so fans had a week to not worry about sellout. They can look and see which art or color really resonated with them the most. And the records were fairly priced. I think they were like $30, $35. Whatever it was not overpriced. It was no danger of selling out. And yes, it was a lot of merch. But you know what that means? You get the people that are going to buy one, whichever one speaks to them, and they'll be happy. And then you get the Swifties, the crazy Swiftie superfans that are going to buy all of it. Everybody's happy in that scenario. Taylor makes a lot of money, and I think it's a really good business model. The problem is, it only will work, guaranteed, for artists as big as Taylor Swift. I feel like if a small artist tried to do that, they would be stuck with a lot of unsold stock, and it would be very discouraging for future drops moving forward. So, while it definitely works for her, if you're a smaller artist, I might not follow that model to the T. So those are the questions from the TMR Facebook group. If you have questions for a future installment of this, please drop it in the comments below. And again, if it's a future video before the next installment, feel free to say, hey, here's a question for your Q&A, and leave a comment there if it comes to you in your mind. I can't wait to do more of these. It's super fun to be able to answer the questions from you guys for you guys. So thank you for watching this first Q&A. I hope you enjoyed it, and there's more videos coming soon. Take it easy.